Jonathan Mayo is a prospect analyst for MLB.com and MLBpipeline.com, and he joins us now on Sportsnet Today. Jonathan, this is the question that Blue Jays fans want answered, and so we turn to the experts because, as I acknowledged, when this deal went down yesterday afternoon, I had to go to Baseball Reference to learn something about both names. What did the Blue Jays get yesterday? Who did they get?
Well, if you want to decide that that both of these guys are going to reach their ceilings, then you've got two guys who will be future starters in the big leagues. Now, whether that happens remains to be seen. I think Anthony Kay, there's probably more certainty. He's a little more advanced, although yes, he's already had Tommy John surgery. But I think that he's close to helping out a big league team. I would say next year he'll be ready. Went to the Futures game this year. Solid mid-rotation lefty with good stuff and good polish. Simeon Richardson is obviously much further away. He's still a teenager. He's got some really good stuff that I think if it continues to come, especially in terms of his command and his secondary stuff, and his third pitch, especially his changeup, then I think he'll get there too. He's just obviously just in full season ball for the time, so he's got a ways to go.
So do you believe that this was the best return the Blue Jays? Basically, I'm wondering about position players versus pitchers, because it seems pretty clear that the Blue Jays were seeking out pitching in this case. Do you believe that they could have done better had they opened their scope a little bit more, or do you think this just happened to be the best players available?
I mean, that's almost an impossible question for an outsider to answer, because I haven't been privy to any conversations that they've had. Given where Stroman is contract-wise, you would think that maybe they could get more, but it's hard to know for sure, because I have no inside information as to who they were talking to and what people were offering up in return. You could make the argument that getting two future big league starters, for one, if you're in selling mode, is not a bad return. On the surface, you would think I could get a little more for Stroman, but especially because this was the first kind of big trade, it's hard to know for sure.
I'm a big believer in tone, and I think it goes across all things, including sports. So, for example, if I were to ask you about dinner, and I wanted to know about a pizza place, and I said, "Hey, is this pizza place good?" and you started with, well, I'm left to assume the return on this trade kind of sucked. And so the question I've been asking all day is, why not just keep him?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know the answer to that question. There certainly was no immediacy. There wasn't this wasn't a trade born of panic. They didn't have to deal him. I think if you look at, I live in Pittsburgh, so the first thing that comes to mind is who the Pirates gave up for Chris Archer. And you can certainly make the argument that, that Stroman is better than Archer and has been. So why couldn't the Blue Jays get a similar return that the Rays did? From year to year, the market changes. Marcus Storman's value may not be, as high as people in Toronto or elsewhere think. But yes, I think on the surface, the first gut instinct is, wow, it doesn't seem like a lot for a guy who was just an all-star.
I'm just looking at the Blue Jays prospects depth chart. We got Anthony Kay coming in at number 5 and Simeon Richardson coming in at number 7. That would make Kay the third best pitching prospect the Jays have, and Simeon Richardson the 5th. Listen, the Jays aren't going to move up the standings. And if you're not going to move up the standings, I just want to see you move up at least the prospects rank. To see two guys enter the top 5, or sorry, I guess top 10, top 5 for pitching prospects, that's encouraging to me. But in the scope of all of baseball, does this even move the needle at all for you?
No. I mean, in terms of where the Blue Jays would rank in an overall ranking, it adds some depth, and it adds two guys that have overall grades of 50, which for us means a legitimate full-time big league contributor, if not better. With some good stuff, but this is not the kind of trade that you say, oh well, boy, before this trade we thought the Blue Jays were 20th of 30 teams, and I'm pulling that number out of thin air. By the way, I've not lined up all the organizations. We just re-ranked all of our lists on Friday, but this is not the kind of trade that makes me say, oh, they go from 20th to 10th. There isn't a top 100 guy involved here. There isn't an elite level prospect involved here. Going back to that Archer trade, you mentioned Meadows and Glasnow, and didn't mention Shane Baz, who was the player to be named later, who was really freaking good. So that just was sort of salt on the wound when that was announced for Pittsburgh fans.
How much should I be concerned about the phrase "had Tommy John surgery" with K? Because it kind of feels not great acquiring a young guy who's had that arm issue. Does that concern you much?
There's so little data in terms of how guys who have the surgery so early on, how they bounce back from it. People like to say that you come back, not everyone, but that the return rate from Tommy John surgery is really high. I feel, and this is anecdotal, I haven't really dug into the research, but I feel like that was true of guys who maybe were a little more established. To have he had Tommy John surgery the summer after he was drafted, and he was out of college, so that's even different than guys who have Tommy John surgery when they're in college or in high school. So there's not enough data because that's a more recent phenomenon. So we have to wait and see. I hate to give you a non-answer, but we really have to wait and see what happens with these guys, say 10 years from now. There is good track record of guys coming back from Tommy John surgery and being fine. But having Tommy John surgery when you're 21, as opposed to when you say you're 27, there may be a difference. I don't know. No one really knows yet, so we'll just have to wait and see. I do know that since he's come back, Anthony Kay has looked like the pitcher the Mets coveted in the first round back in 2016.
Well, that's positive to hear because I think he's going to get good rope next year. I mean, he's at that age where he's close to being major league ready, and they've got to show something for this return. Jonathan, in your expertise, how far are we away from being able to accurately assess this trade from the Blue Jays' perspective?
Well, you'll get, I think you're right. I think you'll see Kay in Toronto at some point next year, so that will be step one. Woods Richardson, he is one of the sort of prototypical, high school draft, projectable. There's a lot of things to like, but he's really far away. So, 3-4 years from now, and this is without sort of assessing what Marcus Storman does afterwards. It's more sort of, what they got for him, how they perform. So I would say 3 years at the earliest, you would have a better sense. But even then, pitchers can take a long time. A guy like Woods Richardson could be pitching great, and then he gets to AA or AAA and stumbles and has to repeat the level, and it seems like he's stalling, but then he figures it out. So that's why you have to sort of wait and see especially when it's really young pitching prospects.